This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, B 306. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia? Senate Committee Room, B 306. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, B 306. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia? Senate Committee Room, B 306. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, B 306. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia? Senate Committee Room, B 306. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, B 306. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia.
It really has been a few short months. Anyway, I think we are going to start, if that is okay with all of you, going down the line. Everyone introduce themselves again, since it is our first meeting after session and for the year, and kind of who you are, and we will go from there. Want to start down there? Yeah, please. You got it.
Got it. Sorry about that. Good afternoon. I'm Richard Kreiner, and I work with the Department for Virginia Department for Aging and Rehab Services. I apologize. I'm filling in for Kathy Hayfield today, but in my role with DARS, I oversee our autism services and customized employment projects, and I'm also a parent of a son with autism.
Good Afternoon. I'm Ann Bevan. I am sitting in for Cheryl Roberts. I am the Division Director for High Needs Supports. Under my division, I have brain injury, housing, employment, ICFs, and all the developmental disabilities waiver. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Hi, Tanya Milling, Executive Director at the ARC of Virginia.
Hello, I'm Ethan Long, and I'm the President and CEO of the VIA Centers for Neurodevelopment.
Hello, Ann Flippen. I'm the Executive Director of the Autism Society of Central Virginia.
Hi, Delegate Laura Jane Cohen. I represent HD 15 in Fairfax County, and incredibly excited to be here. Also the parent of, they remind me, an adult with autism, and grateful to be here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tony Hayes on behalf of Dr. Shelton at VDH. I'm the program coordinator for Child Development Center, so that specifically deals with being able to, have that access to disabilities as well as autism, as well as Virginia Bleeding Disorders Program.
Good afternoon. I'm Delegate Patrick Hope. I represent the 1st District, which is in Arlington County, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Council.
Good afternoon. I'm Delegate Philip Scott, represent House District 63, which covers parts of Spotsylvania and Orange. Just a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Rose Neville. I'm an assistant professor and autism researcher at the University of Virginia.
Hi, everybody. I'm Parthy Denora. I'm with the Partnership for People with Disabilities at Virginia Commonwealth University. I'm also a parent of an 18-year-old with autism.
Good afternoon. I'm Jamie Hanks. I serve as the Assistant Director of Special Education in Hanover County Public Schools.
Good afternoon. My name is Giovanni Knight, and I serve as a community educator with the Autism Society of Central Virginia. I am a self-advocate diagnosed with autism, and I have 2 younger siblings also on the spectrum.
Thank you. I'm Beth Ellen Davis. I'm the Division Director of Neurodevelopmental Behavior Peds at University of Virginia Children's Hospital.
Good afternoon. I'm Jen Krajewski. I'm representing the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities.
My name is Connor Cummings. I am a self-advocate and proud to be on this council. So thank
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Tran. I represent the 18th House District in covering parts of Fairfax County.
Thank you, everyone. And I guess I didn't introduce myself, Stella Pekarsky, and I also have an adult daughter with developmental delays. And I think, as you've heard, there are a lot of folks here in professional capacities, but also some overlap with personal connections to the topics that we are discussing today. And I want to give an opportunity to our staff to introduce yourselves.
My name is Lucas Childers, and I'm with DLS.
I'm Brooks Braun, also with DLS.
Lindley Starzer, Senate Committee Operations. All right, thank you, everyone. I think we're going to do some housekeeping business again. If I could kick it off to you to talk about that.
So everyone should have in front of them a copy of the draft of the electronic meeting policy. This policy is identical to the policy of last year, but I'm just going to go over some finer points just as a reminder. First, this policy covers remote participation by individual members. So under this policy, an individual member can participate in council meetings electronically, but it is important to note that there is an additional House rule that limits participation. Under the House rule, House members may not participate by electronic communications, meaning they cannot vote or have formal recommendations if they are participating remotely. For individual requests for remote participation, a member should convey this request to council staff, who would then relay the request to the chair of the council. If the remote participation is due to a personal matter, the remote participation is limited to 2 meetings per calendar year, or 25% of the meetings held per calendar year, rounded up to the next whole number, whichever is greater. It's likely that that would be 2 per year for our council. The individual participation will be approved unless it violates this policy or the Code of Virginia. And if there's ever a time when a member's remote participation is challenged, then the council will vote on whether or not to allow such participation. The second aspect of the policy is that the policy also covers all virtual public meetings, so where everyone is participating virtually. Under this policy, the council can hold all virtual public meetings. Requests for an all virtual public meeting should be conveyed again to council staff, who will again relay that to the chair of the council. Important to note that all virtual public meetings are limited to 2 meetings per calendar year, or 25% of the meetings held per calendar year, rounded up to the next whole number, whichever is greater. And the other note is that all virtual public meetings cannot be held consecutively with another all virtual public meeting. So it just can't go back to back. And then the last part of the electronic policy is the minutes requirements. Individual requests for remote participation, requests for an all virtual public meeting, and votes to deny individual requests for remote participation are all recorded in the meeting minutes of the respective meetings.
Okay, thank you. And we have to accept these every calendar year. So if there are no questions,
I would move adoption.
is there a second? All right, all those in favor of accepting the electronic policy? Aye. All those opposed? Abstaining? Okay, it is accepted. And from that, we're going to get to the meat and potatoes, the exciting part of our meeting, which is the overview of the 2024 and 25 legislation and where we are with that.
Hello again. Okay, so for the past 2 sessions, 2024 and 2025, I've just selected 12 bills that I think are relevant to this council. If anyone has any questions while I'm speaking about these bills, please feel free to interrupt me. We'll start with the 2024 bills, and everyone should have this presentation in front of them as well. The first one on the list is HB 1089/SB 220. Those were identical bills, and they were patroned by Delegate Coiner and Senator Favola, respectively. The summary is attached, and you're certainly welcome to read that as well. I'm going to try and provide a little bit more context for each of these that hopefully goes beyond the summary itself, or at least gets the finer points of it. For 1089/220, what this does is it creates an IEP system called the Virginia IEP that assists in writing, tracking, and transferring IEPs. It also creates a data dashboard for reporting state, division, and school level special education data. It also requires local school boards to designate what's a faculty member.
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you.
No,
Can
please.
we advance the slides so
yes,
that
I'm
people
sorry.
can see? Yeah, thank you.
So as I was saying, what it also requires is that each local school board designate a faculty member as a liaison to help guide families through the IEP process. And then beyond that, it requires that special education family support centers be established in 8 distinct regions in the Commonwealth. Each of those have to be staffed by a regional liaison to coordinate with the local liaisons to implement outreach and support systems and to report to the state parent ombudsman for special education if there are any questions or concerns that are raised by the parents. The position of the state parent ombudsman for special education was also created by this bill. Next up is HB 1165. This was patroned by Delegate Sickles, Delegate Munning-King, and Delegate Shin. This bill requires places of public accommodation to ensure barriers to accessibility are removed when removal is readily achievable. The bill defines places of public accommodation to mean a facility that a private entity owns, leases, or leases to, or operates, and whose operations affect commerce. So it's a pretty broad definition. The bill also states that when determining whether or not an action is readily achievable, the factors to be considered are 1, the nature and cost of the action, 2, the overall financial resources of the place of public accommodation, 3, the geographic separateness or fiscal relationship between the place of public accommodation and any parent company, 4, the overall financial resources of any parent company, and then 5, the type of operations, composition, structure, or function of any parent company, if applicable. The next bill is HB 1246/SB 547. These are identical bills that were patroned by Delegate Munden King, Delegate Willett, and Senator Bagby. These bills require that the Department of Criminal Justice Services establish minimum training standards for law enforcement officers when communicating with individuals with an intellectual or developmental disability, including autism spectrum disorder. The training involved will include behavioral recognition, crisis prevention and de-escalation techniques, and then a review of any tools or technology available to assist communication, as well as educational resources for the autism community themselves. The DCJS has a deadline to establish these training standards by January 1st, 2027, and then law enforcement officers have to complete that training a year later by January 1st, 2028. The next bill is SB 389. So this is actually the bill that reestablished this council itself. Basically, it brought forth the council that existed until 2022, and then expanded the membership from 8 to 25 members. The purpose of this council is to promote coordination of services and resources among agencies involved in the delivery of services to Virginians with autism spectrum disorder, and to promote public awareness of such services and resources. The provisions set out in the bill, as well as the council itself, is currently set to expire on July 1st, 2027. That's the current sunset date for this council. And that brings us to the next bill, which also brings us to the 2025 session, which was HB 1772. HB 1772 was one of actually several bills that were introduced this year during session that had the primary purpose of reconstituting the Autism Advisory Council as a permanent commission within the legislative branch. The bigger picture differences between what the council currently is and what the commission would be is that it would change the composition of the council itself, such that the commission would be required to have a majority of legislative members. And then also what it would do is that it would have dedicated staff. So essentially there would be people that work solely for that commission, and they would be able to do research or conduct any other priorities that the commission had. That bill did fail in session last year. And we can go to 1347. I believe this is the only other failed bill from either session. This was, HB 1347 was patroned by Delegate Srinivasan. It would have prohibited any insurer, corporation, or HMO, health maintenance organization, from imposing any copay, coinsurance, or deductible for the diagnosis or treatment of autism spectrum disorder. That would actually, so it was essentially a two-tiered system. That would apply to anyone that was 18 years of age or younger. And then it also would have removed any visit limits for the diagnosis or treatment of autism spectrum disorder for individuals of any age. And again, that did not pass this past session.
We have a question.
Mr. Shoulders, can I ask a question about that bill there? Do you know if it was recommended that proposal go to the HIRC, the Health Insurance Reform Commission, for consideration, or did they just? Because usually whenever you have asking for a new benefit, that they will table the bill, but they will send a letter to the HIRC to ask them to study. Is this one of those that you're aware of?
I don't recall that being requested, but I'm happy to double check that and follow up with you, Delegate.
All right, thank you.
Sure. The next bill is HB 2501. This was patroned by Delegate Rasool, and it did pass. This was a bill that was actually discussed during last year's council meeting. This is also known as the Blue Envelope Program. It's, I believe, started in Massachusetts and had some success up there. And we did pass it here in Virginia. Basically, what the Blue Envelope Program is that it requires the DMV to develop a program to promote, print, and distribute envelopes for drivers diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder that helps facilitate communication with law enforcement officers during a traffic stop or at the scene of an accident. The envelope has clear statement on there that the driver has autism spectrum disorder, and then it also has space to fill in information that might be related to that kind of communication, what would be helpful for a law enforcement officer to know in that moment. And then there are some technical dimensions to the envelope itself. It has to be large enough to fit a registration card as well as an insurance card and contact information. I'm sorry, emergency contact information. It doesn't require the DMV to verify any information that's included, and it disclaims any liability for the veracity of the information that actually is included. I will note for the council that this was something that was brought up on the May 8th meeting of the Disability Commission as well. And I believe at that time, members did express an interest in having someone from the DMV come in to talk about what it would look like to have this implemented in Virginia. So I think that could be coming later this summer. But there's no date that's been set for that or anything. The next bill is HB 1805. This was patroned by Delegate Cohen, and it passed during session. I'm sure Delegate Cohen will be able to answer any questions anyone has about this better than I could, but my understanding is that essentially it requires IEP meetings that are held for post-secondary transition to consider and document information that's related to transition services that would facilitate a successful and efficient transition to the institutes of higher learning. It also requires public institutions of higher learning to adopt policies that certain documentation is sufficient to establish that a student has a disability. The documentation can be a prior IEP, or it can be documentation of a disability due to service in the armed forces. The institution may request additional documentation if the IEP does not fit certain criteria, specifically if it doesn't have information on the nature of the impairment, or if it includes or does not include an evaluation from within the past 3 years, or if it does not include an explanation of the substantial limitations experienced as a result of such disability. Finally, that bill does also require SHEV, the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia, to make a report by November 1st about improving the quality, consistency of IEPs that are dedicated specifically to post-secondary transition planning. The next bill is HB 1806. This was patroned by Delegate Cohen and Delegate Clark. This passed as well. This bill permits IEPs developed for public school students to include accommodation and support for the student during emergency situations and evacuations. It's a permissive bill. It doesn't require, but it does allow this inclusion. If an initial IEP is being developed, it also instructs the IEP team to discuss if such accommodation and support is appropriate. And it requires the Department of Education to provide guidance to local school divisions on how to support IEP teams when considering what specific support is required given the unique context of the disability in question during emergency situations. Next bill is HB 2219/SB 1034. These were partner bills. They're identical, patroned by Delegate Tran and Senator Pekarsky. This is the AAC bill, so it defines what augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC, is, and it's defined as any method or tool other than oral speech that an individual uses to communicate, including gestures, facial expressions, writing, and speech-generating devices. And then it requires that prior to the provision of instruction or direct support of a student, the school division shall document on the student's IEP any AAC and communication access and support needs. That also shall include any individualized training for employees or contractors that provide support or instruction to the student themselves. It also goes into a little bit more detail if such information is included in the IEP prior to the school year, then any of the known instructors or direct support staff are required to take such training prior to the beginning of that school year. And then if there are situations in which that's not possible, so if there's a change in the middle of the school year, or if the student enrolls in a new school division during the year, or gets an initial IEP during the year, or transfers to a completely different educational setting, then in that circumstance, what the bill requires is that the support staff and the instructors take the training as soon as possible. The second to last bill we have is HB 2278, also from this session. This was patroned by Delegate Cohn and Delegate Price. The summary in this case is essentially inclusive of almost the entirety of the body of the bill, so I can just briefly go over that. It requires each school board or division superintendent in consultation with such other stakeholders as it deems appropriate to review the extent to which public elementary and secondary school buildings and grounds in the local school division present physical accessibility challenges and barriers for individuals with disabilities, including challenges and barriers that may prevent such individuals from participating in school activities. Challenges in access to programming and supports, if they exist for individuals with disabilities at public elementary and secondary schools in the local school division. Such schools have begun or plan to address and eliminate all such challenges and barriers. And then finally, state agencies can assist such schools to address and eliminate all such challenges and barriers and fully comply with all applicable state and federal laws. Bill requires each school board or division superintendent to report the findings of such review and any associated recommendations to the chairs of the Senate Committee on Education and Health and the House Committee on Education no later than November 1st of this year.
Before we go on, I do think we do have a question from Delegate Cohen.
Just a comment. I just wanted to say, while I could not love this bill anymore and was so excited to Chief Co, this is really Delegate Price's bill, so I just didn't want to try to take the credit for it.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a bill to add to the list once council is finished.
Sure. And then the last bill we have here is HB 2541. This was patroned by Delegate Tran. It's passed as well. As noted in the summary for this bill, it makes numerous organizational changes to the Information Technology Access Act and ensures that information and communication technology, which is defined as websites and applications, it makes sure that those are equally accessible to those with disabilities as to those without. It requires what's known as covered entities to publish the name and contact information of the Digital Accessibility Coordinator on their website in a conspicuous manner, so it's possible to reach out to that person if any questions arise. This bill does have a staggered rollout date depending on the covered entity, so institutions of higher education, state public bodies, and covered entities with a population of 50,000 or more have to comply by April 24th of 2026, where covered entities with a population of less than 50,000, as well as special district governments, shall comply by April 26, 2027. So roughly a year and 3 days later. The definition of covered entities for that bill is all state agencies, public school divisions, public institutions of higher education, and political subdivisions of the Commonwealth. And Delegate Tran, did you have an additional bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add House Bill 2265 to the list. This was also a bill that I had carried this year, and what it does is it tries to address some of the licensure changes for our preschool autism classes, so that if you are a teacher with 15 years or more of experience teaching in our preschool classes now, that you could petition your superintendent for a recommendation to the Department of Education to continue teaching in that role rather than having to take additional coursework. So that passed, and I hope that will help address some of our teacher shortages that we face right now in our preschool autism classes.
Great. Thank you for that. And Madam Chair, that is the conclusion of the presentation.
I want to, before we go to questions, I also want to add, I patroned SB 1038 that did pass, which was regarding best practices for telehealth visits for serving folks with disabilities, and that is supposed to be disseminated by DBHS. So I think that was an important bill as well. I want to thank you, and I think we do have some questions.
Sure.
Right? No? Yes? Maybe? Comments?
I have a comment.
Okay, go ahead,
I have a
Delegate.
comment. It's mainly about the governance, the future of the council.
Yeah.
The bill that I patroned, I mean, that was the recommendation of this council, and some people may be happy that it failed, others may not. There's also the recommendation of the Behavioral Health Commission as well. And I don't know that we need a decision now, but I think in the future, there's no sense of urgency that we have to get it passed. My understanding, it was a budget issue in terms of assigning staff to it. Given that this council sunsets in 2027, we don't necessarily have to take action, legislative action before then. We can sit it out a year. But I think it's a conversation that we should have, since we're all family here, to think about what we want the future for this council. Do we want it to be a permanent structure with dedicated staff? There are pros and cons to both. And so I just think that at some point in the future, we should think about what we want to do to elevate the issue.
Yeah, thank you, Delegate Hope. I agree, and I'm glad you actually mentioned that, because I heard exactly the same thing. It was a budget issue, and I think, and maybe you have opinions on this, but that may be a conversation for us to have in the fall, considering where the budget will be next year, and if that's an opportunity to maybe push that a little bit further. And I guess we will put that on the to-do list, but it's an important conversation because there was interest in doing this. I was, money is money. So, any other comments? Questions, ideas? Delegate Cohen.
I think just speaking to that and what Delegate Hope said, I also just want to make sure, I think, last time, I think it's tough sometimes for people to get very quickly maybe an idea of what their community thinks about this kind of thing. So I like the idea of having either, have it on our agenda in a couple of months to really make sure that we vetted it out, because I will be totally candid. I was really, really surprised at some of the pushback that we got, and it's absolutely valid, and I very much want us to be responsive to that. And I think, for whatever reason, we just didn't have that conversation last time. And so I want to make sure that people feel really comfortable in being able, let's dig in. And as Delegate Hope said, if it's not this session, then it's not this session, but really let us get it to a place where either we all can feel comfortable, or we all decide that this is, the gathering that we would like to have for autism, and let's just move forward and work to remove the sunset on that. So.
Thank you. And, and we've talked about this, but one of the advantages, the biggest advantage that I see is for us to do a lot of the meaningful and detailed work. It's very hard for us to be able to do that when we are relying on just our staff and, staff that has about 50 other things going on. And I really want this to be a place where we aren't doing the superficial conversations, that we are really digging, and this is my personal thought process on this, really digging in and talking about the difficult topics so we can try to make some meaningful change. But that requires research time and folks who are devoted to this in a way that we may not be able to be doing at this time. But I agree with you, Delegate Cohen. I think giving us the gift of time will be helpful in the long run. I did have a question, and this may be an idea moving into the second part of our discussion today about just, future and where we are going. Bill HB 1246 on the second page. I think maybe if we can take a note on this and see if others are interested in this, but I would be interested to see where we are, if there are updates on what is happening with the training and what that looks like across the Commonwealth, and to make sure that we're staying on top of it, and if there are gaps, just so we know and we are aware and are able to advocate and disseminate and share that information. I would find that helpful. Delegate Cohen?
Thank you so much. I would add that exact comment to 2501 with the blue envelopes. We've had a lot of questions about training for police. I don't think we had money in the budget for it, so I would think in terms of us walking in and trying to figure out what budget amendments we want to put in. This one to me makes me really nervous about the idea of utilizing it without police departments being trained on what it means and why it's being used and all of that good stuff. So if we could get some sort of update on, are there police departments who are already implementing this and what they're seeing, or is everybody kind of holding on implementing because they don't have money for training? So I think that would be great to know if just to add it to your list, Lucas.
Sure.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Senator Durant.
All right, thank you so much. I'm so glad you brought that up because we've had discussions on that as well. And I think I agree with you, especially on both of those, on 1246 and then also on Delegate Rasool's 2501. I think that the training academies, particularly the criminal justice training academies, I believe there's 11, is that right, in the Commonwealth? Or I see some nodding heads, okay. But I know that there's like a lot of different industries, a challenge with getting those who have the ability to do the training. That's been a challenge that I've heard some of them. So I think it'd be a very good part of that conversation going forward and the budget conversations for the upcoming session on the best practices as you sort of detailed. And I know we talked about one of the first advisory councils about the program they do up in Massachusetts, and this really mirrors what Delegate Rasool did. And maybe we can pull some of that down, but I'd love to continue to take a look at that so that they get that right support they need moving forward, because we've got a common goal that we're working toward. We just need to make sure they got the tools they need.
Yeah. To your points, both of your points, I agree. I mean, I think it was great. It's passed. There's a lot of interest, but now the follow through and the details are going to be is this going to be successful or not? So that would be, I think, an important piece to put on.
Just as a follow-up, one of the things that we had working through, and I think it didn't make it into the final part of the budget, but there was some good support bipartisan-wise, was you've got those in the training academies, and they're each, I think, the way that it's set up is those who are participating in the training academies, and so my locality be Stafford, Fredericksburg, et cetera, they go to the Rappahannock Regional one. They're supposed to send trainers over, but they are capped on having staff. So one of the suggestions that went through the training academies as they all met at the state level was to allow those that had retired to be able to go over and work part-time, and I think that's a VRS issue, which is kind of where we got into some of the, a little bit of the hiccups with it, but not as much as I was expecting, frankly. So I think that might be a good way for us to follow up on that, is to say if there are those, especially if they've got some background in the training we're talking about, that they might be willing to come in. We all know that they're not going to make as nearly as much money as if they went into the private sector, but if they're willing and able to come in and work and lean into those training, and they've got some of the skill sets we're talking about, we might want to pursue that further.
No, I think that's a great idea, and if you can try to see if we can bring some folks in to talk to us directly about it and kind of find that overview. I think that's a great thing for us to be monitoring right now. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I guess want some clarification on this. The language on top says autism spectrum disorder, but in the body it says intellectual and developmental disability, and I wondered, is the Disability Commission, I'm just kind of from a coordination standpoint, there are specific issues around autism and law enforcement. And then there are some other issues with other disabilities. And I'm just wondering, is anybody else talking about this? How do we coordinate and align this? Because there are differences to the kinds of trainings you do specific to autism with other disabilities.
And I'm sorry, is this with respect to 1246?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I believe the individuals with autism spectrum disorder, I believe in the body of the bill itself, it does speak specifically about members working with individuals with autism spectrum disorder specifically. I can look into whether or not that's part of a larger training set that would include intellectual and developmental disabilities outside of autism spectrum disorder, but I certainly take your point that it could be specified specifically to autism, or perhaps it's larger than that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Sharon, you want to go ahead?
I just wanted to add on the blue envelope. I just saw yesterday, actually on Facebook, that the sheriff in Loudoun County, he was personally talking about how great he thought the program was, and he had a picture of people using it. So I guess it seems like it's working for them, so maybe we want to reach out to someone from that county and let them talk about what is working and what isn't, since they are actually using it right now.
Interesting. Okay. I have not heard that. You want to go ahead? Things are not coming up on the screen, so if you could just put your hand up.
I was just going to say that we often recommend to families of children who have elopement to take advantage of the Project Lifesaver, which is available in every county, and that goes through the sheriff's department. So I'm just wondering if that couldn't be a vehicle for the blue envelope.
Interesting. That's a good idea. Anyone else? Dawn?
I have some thoughts about the blue envelope.
Microphone.
Thank you. One concern I have, I think it's a great model, but I think one thing we should be cognizant of with the program is I think a lot of self-advocates still have some hesitation about using the blue envelope program and the stigma that's going to come with it, as with any autism self-identifiers. So while I think it's a great, really efficient way that we can help police get the right information in a situation, I think part of some efforts that need to be thought through is how can we help the autism community themselves also feel comfortable with using this?
I think that's a great point. No, go ahead.
Just to that point specifically, I do know that the text of that bill does include a provision where it requires essentially the DMV, who is distributing the blue envelopes, that they cannot retain any of the information whatsoever beyond what is necessary to simply distribute the envelopes themselves. It's not something that's in a database that can be looked up at a later time to see who's part of the program.
And I think to your point, as I'm understanding it, is how do we also educate the community about why this can be a positive and helpful measure and program for them to, and I think there is conversation to be had about that. Just education about what it is, why it will be used. And I think a lot of that may also come up as they're developing, and hopefully that'll be part of the larger conversation of the development of the program, because I think it won't be successful otherwise, to your point. Delegate Cohen, and we'll go down the...
And I think too, the feedback, and it was interesting, Sharon, what you mentioned about the Loudoun County Sheriff. I saw that on Facebook, and then I was really surprised, to be honest. A lot of the feedback was pretty negative. And, I think, making sure, yes, that people understand this is intended to be value add, but if it isn't working that way, we certainly need to know. And I do think, what we're seeing now, especially coming from the federal government, are some real concerns about a registry, about some sort of identification, that people are even more sensitive to that idea than they were 6 months ago when we were talking about this bill. So I agree. I love the idea of, I hope that this is one of those things where we're having a conversation and we can go back in and either make some amendments or, I want us to be really open-minded to the implementation and what that is looking like.
Go ahead, I think.
Yeah, I was just going to add on that. I think kind of what you said, Parthy, making sure that all of those things are considered in this feedback. How can as they're developing their curriculum, tie into the community, engage with the community of subject matter experts who have lived experience and might even be able to help in some of the trainings and ensuring that that curriculum covers all of the pieces. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, go ahead all the way at the end.
I was just curious, it seemed like it may be of value, if we have not already looked into it, the work that UVA Autism Drive is doing around first responder training for autism. I know one of the things that I was really interested in is they were doing recruitments, looking for self-advocates that could go out and be involved in some of those trainings. So if there's at some point, whether it's the blue envelope or just the general training, which I do think should be interconnected because they're all kind of in that same wheelhouse, tapping into that knowledge base might be good.
I think we have someone who may have some ideas around this.
Thanks. So we just started, so I'm the director of that program, and we just started training statewide in March. We've had 200 first responders sign up to train since March. We have about 8 training academies also enrolled just this year. So there's been a ton of interest. One thing that I sort of, as this bill goes into effect, I've been thinking about through that project is, to your point about VRS and some concerns about the availability of trainers, if DCJS would be able to approve training online for people who, first responders in communities who don't have access to human trainers who could come, because I think there are a lot of communities in really rural parts of the state who want this education and need this education, but we can't always get trainers out to them on various topics, not just specific to autism. So that's something that I think DCJS was approving more of during COVID and went away since COVID. So that could be really helpful for some of this work and getting that education and competency out and maintained within communities.
First of all, that's amazing. I think it really speaks to the point that there's interest in there, and we have to make sure that we're putting the resources for folks to get the training. And maybe that's something that this council, as we're working on recommendations, can look at, because to your point, yeah, I mean, not everybody has easy access, and I think that's a great thing for us to look into as we're crafting recommendations later in the year. Any other comments? Yeah, go ahead.
I guess my question was, for the Bloom envelopes, are we discussing that as something that's required for drivers with autism spectrum disorder who are diagnosed? Okay, just wanted to be sure there, given again the current climate, to help also with it being publicly, when we promote it as being optional, those who do not want to identify still feel safe to not do so, while not also potentially the grapevine will get you them detracting others. So just wanted to be sure about that as something that could be helpful to talk about of, hey, this is an option, this is here. You are supported by the Commonwealth, but if you're not wanting to engage at this time, also understandable.
Yeah, no, very good point. As it's an accommodation, if you choose to take advantage of it, it is not a mandatory. If there are no more questions, or I do think Delegate Tran, do you want to speak? I mean, we talked a little bit about future meetings, and there was a topic that you thought we should tackle.
Thanks so much, Madam Chair. One of my constituents raised concerns about how do we address the needs of twice exceptional students? And so making sure that, I think Fairfax has some best practices guidelines, but how do we make sure that whether it's teachers are getting the training that they need to help support these students in their classroom, whether it is understanding the breadth of support, so starting with understanding the breadth of support that these students might need and making sure that teachers have that training and the resources to follow. And so I think that I raised with Madam Chair as a potential discussion item for our future meetings, bringing in some experts who can help us kind of delve a little bit more deeply into that issue.
Yeah, and I think that is a topic that, educational, of course, but not always rising to the top of the priority list. So I would be interested in hearing about that and seeing if there are, recommendations or things we could do to help lift up the needs. I also, having had some conversations, I know there is a lot of anxiety right now and also a lot of questions about what is happening at the federal level. How is that going to impact this community through healthcare, through grants, mental health? So we are going to be working with DMAS and DBHS to we're going to give them a little bit of time to kind of figure it out, and hopefully by our next meeting be able to come and present to us some of the things that are happening and what we need to be thinking of and what our community needs to be aware of. So if there are any ideas around that or anything you think we should specifically be asking for, please share that here or reach out to me as we are coordinating the meeting and the presentations. Go ahead.
I think that's great. Really excited to hear that because we all need to know. I do think there's one thing that gets a little less attention than the Medicaid, which is the ACL, Administration on Community Living. And I was going to ask if there was any communication or something that we could do with our emergency committees who are focused on that impact, because really, when you look at our DD councils and our centers for excellence, there's a lot of innovation, research around autism, funding assessments, needs assessments, gap assessments from the board, things that we really wouldn't want to lose. And so what that impact might be. And I didn't know if it was appropriate for this group to have any communication with those emergency committees to make sure there's understanding about that impact. Because when Medicaid's this big, it's hard to see this other thing that's smaller, but is actually the underpinning for all of community services, in my view. This is a very dire thing that's hard to get as much time around.
Yeah, no, I actually think it's completely appropriate, and it is our job to make sure that we're advocating and looking at that. I don't know, where that sits in the larger conversations or how, if it's going to be impacted, but yeah, we should be talking about it. I think it's appropriate, and I think we can be working with those committees. And yes.
But right now, it's
Yes.
not been funded.
And
Would be where it stands today, I think, in the administrative budget.
that's also why we don't want to jump on it. We want to see, just as conversations are being had, where this is all going. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, I would just like to also respond by saying, on the House committee, that we have a email address, and that the public and stakeholders can write to make recommendations and highlight issues for the emergency committee on the House side that's looking at the federal funding and workforce cuts. And so I would encourage you to do that as this committee does its work too, is that I think folks are reaching out directly so that the committee, as it's putting together its future meeting agendas, like kind of has some of these issues on their radar. And we'll make sure you get that.
Thank you. Any other questions before comments, ideas? I think we're going to go ahead and open it up to public comment. I did have somebody text me that the link online was not working well. Are we? Okay, I think that, do we have anybody? Do we have anybody here who would like to provide some public comment? No. Is there any way for us to know if the link is not working, if there are folks on there?
Oh, no, there's not it's just going out. It's not coming in.
Okay. What does that mean?
We're broadcasted, but there's no WebEx for this meeting. It says no hotline for remote testimony. Right. Okay. That's set up, that has to be set up beforehand. It's 30 minutes before the meeting.
Oh, okay. I think we usually do that, but okay, unfortunately, then we will not be able to take online comments, but we need to have that for the future, yeah, because we've done that in the past, and I think people expect that. So if anybody's out there listening, apologies that that was not sent out. Please, if you would like, send us written public comment, and we will be happy to share it with the committee, or we will have that for you for next month. All righty, very good. Yes.
I got a text from someone who's doing a question for us. Says, talk about the need for a commitment to the Medicaid waivers being funded.
I, yeah, I don't know that, I understand the interest, and maybe that's part of the conversation next month, but I don't know if we're the appropriate avenue for that right now, and if that's more of a disability commission question. Yeah. So, okay, Delegate Cohen.
Oh, I did not mean to stand between us and going home. I'm so sorry.
Getting on that traffic.
The one comment that I received after the 1805, which was for post-secondary folks having to take people's IEP as proof of their disability. The next conversation that I've had from that is some real conversation about secondary educators, so about our professors in college and their training on disabilities generally, but autism specifically. And what requirements do we have? My understanding is none, though I think there are folks here who probably know a lot better than I do. And so, you know, what role do we have in public colleges and universities, and what training is required for their teaching staff? And so I didn't know if that was an appropriate conversation for this committee, because it seems with the prevalence of autism in particular, I think in our secondary education, you know, I feel like it's an appropriate topic, but it's slightly self-serving since it piggybacks on my own my own bill. But I'd be interested to hear other people's thoughts who work in secondary education.
I think it's appropriate. So I think maybe we can tack that on to a larger education conversation. I think that makes a lot of sense. I just, you know, you and I, we haven't had a lot of experience with higher ed, but having learned some of these things coming from K-12 has been really eye-opening about the lack of, you know, training in some ways. And I think it's something we can and will look at. So with that, I don't see any other hands. A motion to adjourn? Second? All right, all those in favor? All right, we're done.
The Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, B 306. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia. Senate Committee Room, B306. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia.